So good evening, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the video series Black 365. Tonight's conversation is called Let's Talk About It. Conversation about mental health and healing. And we are joined by some awesome professionals. But before we get to them, I'm going to introduce myself. I am Miss Loyandra Cooper, College and Career Support Specialist here at Evanston Township High School. I am also co-chair for the Black History Month Committee. And Ms. Clark?
Hey, how everybody doing out there? My name is Ms. Clark. I'm your extracurricular activities coordinator for Evanston Township High School, and I'm also your other co-chair for Black History Month. And it just brings me great pleasure to have this conversation regarding mental health tonight with all of you here. So at this point, we're going to have all of our expertise on the line go ahead and introduce themselves, starting with Miss Imani Wilson.
Hey everyone, my name is Imani Wilson. I work as a school social worker here at ETHS, working with the sophomore class, so class of 2023. I think this is a really important topic, so I'm excited to get into it with you all tonight.
Hi, I am Manira Bolas. I am the school psychologist at ETHS. I am with the class of 2022. As my role as a school psychologist, I primarily work with students in regards to testing for special education, but also within that, I work on one-on-one meeting with students for social emotional needs, as well as executive functioning weaknesses. And I'm excited to be here tonight. Thanks for having me.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Hi, Mike Edwards. I am a former Evanston Township High School school social worker who is now an assistant principal at Dawes Elementary in District 65. I also serve as the department head for the social work department in District 65. Thanks for having me here.
Hi, I'm Anthony King. I'm one of the deans at ETHS. I have the class of 2023. I am a former social worker, almost 20 years. From the time of ETHS social work, as well as social work for Waukegan Public Schools. Wonderful to be here with you all.
So thank you for you all joining us tonight. And we know that this conversation is so very heavy, and we definitely know that we're not going to be able to cover any and just everything that we want to cover, but we look at this as just a point to just initiate the conversation and get everyone who is watching this just a little information, and to want them to continue to get some more and just dive more into understanding the importance of mental health. So I'm going to toss it over to Ms. Clark, and she's going to just get us started.
All right. So first things first, we want to talk about what is mental health. Can any of you guys explain that to me, defining what mental health is?
I can take this one. I think it's a really great question, and can be very easily misunderstood, in that I think mental health often gets just construed in the negative sense, right? Like, oh, there's something wrong with you, or that kind of thing. But really, in my experience, mental health is much like physical health. Except it's the health of your mind and your spirit, in a sense too. And so just like you do things every day to take care of your physical health, like eating, drinking water, exercising, in the same way you should be doing things each day to try and care for your mental health. There's a lot that happens with us emotionally each day, a lot of experiences that we have, and we need to make sure that we are taking time to process those things and just understand what's going on with us.
Yeah, I completely agree with Imani. And I think to build on that a little bit, there's such a spectrum when we talk about mental health, right? We can talk about our everyday mental health, like Imani was referencing, in regards to, keeping that up, that self-care component that you often hear about. And then there is the spectrum where it becomes more significant and severe. So maybe there's a diagnosis of depression or anxiety or ADHD. Those are three that I personally often see, especially, within our children, within our community. And in this time now of COVID, where a lot of people have anxiety around COVID and illness and sickness, but also with depression, of not being able to do the things that they were doing before, and that kind of sense of loss that they have with everything that's changed over the last year. So mental health doesn't have to be extremely severe. It can be an everyday thing, but there is a spectrum.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is just like any other way we think of our physical health, mental health is something that needs to be practiced and exercised, right? You know, there's things that you learn growing up or that you have to be taught, whether it's how to take care of yourself, how to name your emotions, how to express them effectively, how to communicate, how to get along with others. So I think it's like anything else, it's a muscle that needs to be exercised and developed, and it doesn't stop developing as we age.
I'd agree. And I also would say that we all have to monitor our own mental health as well as that of those around us. It's very important.
Thank you guys all for jumping in and letting us know, starting off the framework of what mental health really is and how it relates to just taking care of ourselves, but also everyone around us. And also noticing that mental health is like exercising, right? You do it, the more often you do it, the better it feels for your body, yourself, and how you can feed off for other people. So the next things we're going to talk about is defining different ways mental health looks. So if anyone can explain to me what mental health may look like for one person, may be the same for another. Can you explain that for people?
I can start us off. I think a key piece, since we are high school, is the way it can, like, let's say even depression can show up based on your age. So oftentimes, like with children, under the age of 18, depression can almost show up as irritation and frustration and almost anger. Not always having those words behind emotions can make it difficult for students to really express that lack of engagement or motivation that they may be dealing with due to depression. And so that's sort of one way where, parents may see it as defiance, or they may see the lack of motivation as if he just doesn't want to listen, or she just doesn't want to listen, when really there is symptoms of depression that the student is experiencing. And then of course, as you get older, there's more language that you may have around the emotions that you're having. And so you're able to communicate it in different ways about how you're feeling. So that's kind of one way that I can think of in regards to it looking different, maybe based on your age.
That's a great point. And just to go further off of that, when you think about younger children, right, students in pre-K through 8th grade, I mean, the younger you get, it really does look like that acting out behavior, because we know students developmentally don't have the words to really convey what's going on inside. And so it's important that we start early giving kids that language. So you'll see a lot of elementary social workers or mental health professionals and even teachers talking to students about like size of the problem, giving colors, right? Red, yellow, green. These are things that kids and children see as an early age, and so they can match it to ways they feel or how we feel inside.
If I could,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Manira.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say one thing that I think often gets overlooked in talking about what mental health looks like is the idea that our bodies can actually provide really valuable information to us about how we're feeling. And so if you're noticing that you're having difficulty sleeping, maybe not getting enough sleep, oversleeping, not eating like you usually do, or maybe overeating, digestive issues, loss of interest in things that are typically like really exciting to you, mood changes, weight loss, weight gain, like those are all signs, kind of changes in your day-to-day, your body, that something might be off with you emotionally. So you can know that for yourself and for your kids when you're seeing those things. Just be a little bit more curious about that and what might be the source of those things.
Thank you so much for that. Can you guys explain to all of our viewers out there how generational mental health can kind of play a role in our students today?
Sure. I mean, you may have someone who experienced a deep level of trauma, and just through their survival of that experience, sometimes they have children who may experience something similar. It could be environmental. It could be exposure to something that occurred with their parents. There's just many ways that could come about. And then you have a lack of resources sometimes with some folks where maybe had they received a certain amount of help for the situation or education on the situation, maybe they go about treating it a different way. And maybe they're able to stop a cycle of trauma, so to speak. And so those are just some of those examples.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Dean King brings up a really good point in regards to not necessarily having the resources or the tools at a younger age. I think now within the school system, we have really prioritized mental health and grit and a lot of social emotional learning and curriculum, like for students. And like, my mom was growing up like that wasn't part of the curriculum. And so I think sometimes students may have a different language than their guardians, which may have a different language than, their parents. And so as a mental health provider, my goal is to really work with families to help them communicate these needs and these traumas and how aspects of mental health may show up in them, how their emotions can be communicated to each other so that they can listen and hear. So I just think, across generations, there's just different language that's used around mental health and our emotions, that it's kind of creating that tie to sew it all together.
And see, what I'm hearing from everyone is that there is a sense of generational influences, but also a sense of cultural experiences that can really play into one's mental health. And even with all the stuff that's going on in our society, how does the pandemic, you feel, have had an effect on our students as a whole, with also the generational and cultural experiences?
Can I go back and say something as well?
Absolutely.
So I just want to make sure that there's something else is reflected. And I want to say that there are also folks who have resources at their fingertips, but maybe they're in survival mode in their life, or maybe they're having trouble accessing. They have the resources, but life takes over, and then maybe people struggle with their own philosophies, and sometimes there's a debate. Treatment, no treatment, medication, no medication. Sometimes it's just not a clear-cut path, and that's where we come in. That's where providers come in and try to help people sort through things and look at things from different perspectives and review different resources for what they may be. So I really want to say that it's not always lack of. Sometimes the resources are there, but it's not so simple. Sometimes it takes a little while. Sometimes there's other factors involved. There's a lot of things that could form obstacles. There's a lot of different obstacles that could be at play. However, fortunately, there are a lot of service providers and there are a lot of great resources, techniques, you name it. So there is hope. There is much hope. So I just didn't want to leave it on the note of being in such a deficit. There is certainly hope. There's certainly resources, and we look forward to making sure that people have what they need.
I just want to jump in and say thanks, Dean King. I really, really appreciate you saying that, because as we know, we think that because we don't have access to a therapist, or there's no database, or we don't know what it is, that does not mean that it does not exist. So I think that's something that, if we don't take anything from this conversation, seeing those who are on this call, whether you are here in ETHS or in District 65, knowing that those resources are there and knowing how to get in touch with those resources. And I think that's something that we definitely know that there may be a challenge with students or families who are represent those underrepresented groups. So we just want to make sure that those resources are made accessible. And I think that's kind of what we get with this conversation of mental health, not the deficit, like you said, but knowing that it does exist. We just need to know who to talk to. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, definitely an important factor. So with you saying that, I just definitely want to touch back into kind of bringing this all together full circle. We have generational things that can affect our mental health. We have the influence of cultural experiences, but also we have this pandemic. And what have you seen, or what can you help students with dealing with these particular issues during this pandemic for their mental health? How can we help them cope? Right, is the big question. Where do they start?
Well, if y'all don't mind, I do think, I love, Dean King, how you mentioned survival mode. And I think that is really present with the COVID pandemic right now. We have families who are struggling to work, to make money, to bring in cash, but also to feed themselves and buy simple things like winter coats. I mean, it's negative something outside right now, and it's tough. And I think before we get into coping, I really want it to be known how much of a toll this has taken on our families of color, from my observations and what I've witnessed. And even something as simple as the technological divide, right? Like having consistent and reliable internet. So what you're seeing students, either high school or even below, who are socially isolated, right? Of course, they're with their families. Of course, they're with people who love them, but there's something there when that sense of community is broken. Where you're not in the school building, or you're not able to go to your community centers or your churches or your restaurants, even for a lot of people, your barbershops and hair salons, right? You're losing something. And I think our students are really losing that too. Not saying that necessarily there's a easy solution for that, but it is real, and we have to acknowledge that before we start talking about what we got to do to make that better.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I feel like a piece of it is having the conversations with the children, with your children, and honest, this is hard. There's a lot of loss. There's, a lot of social justice issues that are happening in the community. There's a lot of death around, a lot of uncertainty of what tomorrow is going to look like, what next year is going to look like, what education is going to look like for you moving forward. And so from my perspective, I think that it would be difficult for any parent, any professional to say, this is the answer, but it's more of, let's have the communication, let's acknowledge emotions and feelings around what's happening, and start there. Because, in schools, often, especially when you get to a certain, high school level, peers become a huge resource of students communicating their emotions to each other. And so for them not to have that, you need to bring it back to the family and give them that window and that space to communicate what they're doing. And the best way to do that is to model it and to show our vulnerability as adults around this situation.
I wanna take a moment because, again, I think creating this conversation around community and culture is very, very important, and we are very intentional with doing that. But can we speak to, as Mr. Edwards was talking about, those the things that people are struggling, food insecurity, right? Clothing, not having enough clothing. How is that conversation look, right? Or how are we really talking about that being in this community of Evanston, right? Are we really, diving into that in terms of how that has affected us, not just now being in a pandemic, but how that has played a role into mental health awareness and just everything since, before pre-COVID. Can we talk a little bit about that and why that is such a, for lack of better words, a taboo subject to talk about those things that we are missing out on in the community of Evanston, or the things that we don't touch too much on? I would love to hear some of your opinions on that.
Can you restate or narrow the question down a little bit? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm on mute. No worries, no worries. So how has the conversation changed about things that underrepresented communities, Black and Brown families, struggle with in terms of mental health, but dealing with what they don't have? How has that conversation changed before COVID, right? Are we talking about something totally different, or are we not? Are we still talking about the resources or the lack of resources that they didn't have before COVID, and how that has impacted them even more so now? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I want to say that the door for that conversation is open wider now. I think globally, we can all identify with struggle to some extent. And so with that being said, I think folks are a little more comfortable letting us know what they need, and letting us know what some of the issues are. And then we are probably really hypersensitive to trying to not only meet the needs, but to provide some outreach, and so maybe before, if a student's absent, a few days, maybe it's, you get the absence report or whatever. And now you got folks saying, hey, everything all right over there? Y'all all right? Y'all need something? Is everybody okay? I mean, it just opens up a different dialogue, and it causes everybody to sort of relax and have that conversation. As hard as it might be, those conversations become difficult, but the door for the conversations are open a little wider, and there's just so many people on deck just trying to figure out where they can fit in to help as well.
Yeah, and I think one change that I've also seen is not just to focus on the lack of resources now, but conversations that are large in regards to systemic issues, and not just at ETHS, right? I think there's been more conversations about how our national, Illinois systems, national systems impact Black and Brown families. And so I think that before, especially this is my perspective, because I'm not from Evanston, and one of few who came from someplace else. And I think, Evanston's so interesting because of the socioeconomic differences, right? That makes up this community, and there's a lot of haves. And so I think that there hasn't really been that space to talk about the systemic issues as much, because a good amount of people had it okay. They were still doing all right. And so I think now there's been more call to, hey, if my neighbor over here is not doing all right, that means ultimately to some degree, I'm not either. So let's work together, let's figure out. And so, no, it's not better, completely, but I think there's at least a conversation now, and there's an acknowledgement that allows for people who are really struggling, I think, to feel seen more than they were pre-COVID.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Manira and Dean King said. I mean, if your question is, whether the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated, a lot of issues that existed, prior to the pandemic, I mean, the answer is obviously yes, right? Like, we have seen the ways in which, inequality, even in the way that the COVID-19 has impacted the Black community, disproportionately than other communities, like the lack of access to mental health care, the distrust of the medical system, in general, that exists, particularly within the Black community for good reason, and so I think that, it's certainly made a lot of people reckon with their privilege on the flip side of that too, right? So do you have stable internet connection? Do you have space in your house to work from home? Do you even have the ability to work from home? Or are you someone that has to go in anyways, you know? And so I think that this whole pandemic has brought to light some of those issues, both of privilege and the continued existence of like pretty severe inequalities in this country. And people are having to sit with that. Literally because there's nothing else to do in some ways, right? Like this is on the news, like this is what people are thinking about. And so, yeah, I think the pandemic has certainly given us all an opportunity to reconsider kind of where we fall in terms of our privilege and what our responsibility is in that.
You touched on something, Imani, that is a fear for me, for the community moving forward. You know, at some point, this is going to be we're going to return to some sense of normalcy. We may be not wearing masks every day. People can be congregated in spaces, but my fear is that responsibility that people are feeling right now, that community spirit, those donation funds and those community organizations, what's going to happen when we're not dealing with COVID anymore, right? Are we still going to be centering the needs and repairing the history of this country that's been so damaging to our Black and Brown family, you know? And I'm just really like worried about that, because I know we've seen these things, and maybe that's just the cynic in me, but I'm not feeling too optimistic about this energy keeping it strong. And I think that's a challenge to the community more so than anything.
Yeah, I am right there with you. I mean, I feel like, yeah, even now as numbers start to get like a little bit better, it feels like there may be less of this like gusto. But to kind of bring it back to like the mental health aspect piece too, is I feel like if people are so exhausted from COVID or from, you know, food and all these different aspects, like mentally and just like emotionally exhausted, makes it really challenging to continue to fight for it. And so I think that's why, you know, this conversation is so important, and why when we talk about mental health, you know, it's not just to make sure that you're okay, but you can't help other people, right, if you're not in an okay space. And so I think the goal and the hope is that people prioritize themselves, what they need, so that they can help their kids, so that their kids can grow up and be, you know, helpful to this fight as well. So I see it all really tied in, and was definitely, I think for me personally, something that I had to work through last summer with George Floyd, you know, was like, how is my role in all of this? And it was realizing, oh, my role is to help people be in a space mentally where they can fight, you know, they can address these systemic issues head on, and still be able to protect their joy. So yeah.
We talk about the social injustice, things that are going on in our Black and Brown communities that these students are facing. And Minora, you talked about putting our students in a space where they can really fight for what they believe in, but also mentally come back to a place where they find some joy. What can they do? Because I have a lot of students who come to me or come to Ms. Cooper and talk about, I'm Black in America, and this is just, the world is just wrong, and I'm not in a good space, right? How do we tackle that? How do we reaffirm our students that it's okay to want to be on the front line and stand up for what you believe in, but they don't know how to retrack and gain the mental perspective of being safe back when they get home? How do we help them cope with that, or how do we help them deal with, I won't say cope, but deal with those matters that they're facing in the social injustices going on in our world right now?
I think that's a really great question, because I mean, it's something that impacts all of us, right? Not just our students, but also as Black professionals, Black parents, just, you know, living in this world and seeing the ways in which like things just are not right. You know, it can be hard to get up in a world where it feels like you're not heard, you're not respected, you're not listened to. I was talking about this whole idea with a group of students yesterday and had brought to their attention this quote by Audre Lorde, which is, I'm not going to quote it exactly right, but it's something to the effect of how like self-care is an act of, or self-preservation is revolutionary in and of itself, meaning like our continued existence, like if we are able to care for ourselves as Black people and continue to support one another, then we are engaging in a revolutionary act because we live in a world that doesn't want us here. So the more that we can do to ensure our survival in this space and make sure that we are, speaking up when we need to, asking for what we need, and just making our voices heard, we are in and of itself like pushing back against that system. And so I think that's, again, as everyone is saying, like why this conversation is so important, because, in taking care of our mental health, like we are continuing to survive, which we have a long legacy of here as Black people in the United States, right? There's been, we've experienced a lot of oppression and a lot of death, like as a collective community, yet we have been resilient, we have survived, and continuing that tradition, I think, is really a beautiful part of our history, and also like part of our responsibility, I think, too, to continue.
You got me in my feelings right now, Imani. That's like, I feel better like just hearing you say that. I love what you said about responsibility. I think I have a responsibility to my ancestors who are still alive and who have passed, right? About to continue on, to do the best that I can do, to get help, to leave the world a better place. So I think as just sitting here looking at this group of people, right? We are people who at least are devoted to leaving the generations behind us in a better place than the world we entered or leave. So I think that's a start. I love that idea of asking for what you need. So obviously when we're talking about mental health, right? Find those resources in your schools, right? Our parents, our families, our Black families are paying a lot of tax money to make sure that their kids are taken care of and their families are taken care of. And that's what we're here for. So hold us accountable. I mean, that's what I really love, is when our Black parents come up in a meeting and they're like, well, hold up now, because you say you're all about this, but why is my kid not getting that? Why am I being left out of this equation? And so I think you gotta advocate. Use your voting power. We got a bunch of 18-year-olds who may be watching this or soon to be 18-year-olds. Get them registered to vote. Make sure you use that power, because we saw what happened this year when people use their voice, and they can do powerful things for the greater good.
Yes, I completely agree. I think like in this world of social media, it's easy to be like, oh, I want to be the social activist influencer that's going to have 500,000 followers and like, be the Jay-Z of activism or whatever. And I think that there's an aspect of like you are so powerful in being who you are in the space that you are in whenever you're in it. So like every text message chain you're in with friends, that can be a moment of calling out something that's inappropriate that's said, right? Like there's so much power in little moments that our students have that doesn't have to be, this big, huge campaign around social activism. And also taking the time to reflect of how is there things that I'm passionate about? Can I tie it into activism? I mean, you see there's a lot of like artists now, right? That they're making this beautiful art around activism pieces. That's tying into something they're already really passionate about. The poet, right? That was just at the inauguration, poetry was something that like that is social justice in itself too. So it doesn't need to be, it should continue to be authentic to who you are in what already brings you joy, so that it doesn't feel like you're going out and doing something that is discongruent with who you are. So, that's what being young is for: exploration, figuring out, trying different things, seeing what works for you. There's not a rush to know exactly what kind of activist you want to be.
I like that. I really like that, Manara. I just want to add to that. We are wonderful consumers. Black and brown folks. We read all we need to read. We look at what we need to view, and we buy what we need to buy and go where we need to go. We need to produce more, you know. So if just to your point, if you kind of like to sing, even if you're not Mahalia Jackson or whomever, do it. You know, if you like to fiddle around with a harmonica or something, do it. You know, if it's dancing in place, whatever it is, beautiful forms of expression. We all have them. We're all able to do that. We can create new. And I tell you, even, you know, it's kind of a cliche when we talk about breathing techniques and stuff. I personally believe that we could end smoking if people would practice the correct breathing techniques. I mean, you know, sometimes there are just so many things within ourselves. If we're mindful enough that we don't have to go outside of ourselves to always have that thing. Because no matter how much therapy and treatment you get, there is the time when you're alone. There is that time when you look to the left, you look to the right, and it's just you. And so just you know, preparing folks for those situations. And also transitions. You know, we all know as practitioners, we've had students to kind of divulge and really let everything out, and then the bell rings and it's kind of time for them to get to class. So just helping them to manage, you know, transitioning from certain thoughts and you know, ideas, and just planning time to have time for yourself and to be able to express, you know, safely and confidently. I think those are all important.
Just listening to everybody, I can recall a quote that has stayed with me since I was in high school. And it says, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And I think that just really speaks volumes to making sure you assure yourself that your mental health is good, but you got to start exactly where you are and do what you can to advocate for yourself and the ones that you love. So just moving from there, we know that mental health can start, or mental health issues start even at a younger age. What does that look like? Especially talking to you, Mike, at the elementary level. What does that look like, and how do we see it transition into the high school levels? And you guys can touch on that, because you guys are all professionals at the high school level.
Oh, thanks for asking. And I think something we spoke on a little earlier is kind of that biggest indicator of like student who is just acting out and you kind of don't know, or there's no real obvious reason, right? Maybe they're especially sensitive and maybe tearful. Sadly enough, and this starts young and I hate to see it, but sometimes some students will self-harm, you know, either hair pulling, picking at their skin, or even getting surface level scratches, or unfortunately worse. There's a lot of signs. There's no like threshold where you like the older kid shows it in a different way. I mean, a lot of these what we call maladaptive habits start young, and it's a person who doesn't have the language or the voice to cope with it in a way that's going to be helpful or productive. I think that's probably the biggest things we're seeing. Social isolation for me personally, like in my mental health work, whenever I see someone that's isolating intentionally or even unintentionally, I know like we got to get on top of that, because, you know, human beings and people of color, Black people, right? We came from like these beautiful communities, right? We talk about community parenting and it takes a village, right? And so when you see someone out there on their own, that's not a good thing, right? That's a very new American ideal of individualism, but that's not what's really working. We're seeing that right now. So I think that's a big indicator right there, as a kid who's kind of off on their own and doesn't have anyone that they connect with. I'm curious to hear what y'all think.
Jump in a little bit. I know one thing Mike had mentioned near the beginning of this conversation was the importance of, or just the idea that some elements of like mental health have to be learned, like such as like identifying and naming your emotions, which is something that, ideally, starts really early on. You're learning how to do that, maybe even before you get into your kindergarten classroom, right? Like with your parents or at home. And I think one thing that I see a lot in my work with high school students is like an inability to do that, or some difficulty in answering that question, like, how are you feeling? So we have different tools that we use, like emotion wheels, which is a wheel with a bunch of different words on it. The English language is so expansive, right? So there's so many different words one could possibly use to describe how they're feeling. And I think that's a really important thing to be doing early on. And if you kind of have some difficulty with that, it shows up later on in life, even beyond high school, right? There's adults maybe that still have difficulty naming their emotions. So it's never too early to start that work, or never too late as well.
I think so. One of the things I feel like I see a lot is anxiety. I don't think that's just in the students. I see it in parents as well, and family members. And so part of this is oftentimes I'll have students where they're like, well, I'm feeling better now. And so they won't necessarily practice good coping strategies. And then what happens is they get very anxious and then they haven't practiced it, so they don't know how to do it. And so recognizing that good mental health starts even when you're feeling good. And so when you are working with your kids and they're little, building strategies around, journaling or, drawing or painting or different sort of things that once they get older, we know as a traditional coping strategies in those times of anxiety, but integrating them earlier on, I think can be helpful for some students.
Great. Thank you guys for that too. From the younger generation to the high school level it just seems to be that mental health is something that we just have to keep talking about, right? This language, the communication is just so important. But I know growing up for me in a Caribbean household with a single parent, we were always taught, hey, what happens in this house here, don't go anywhere else, or we're gonna go to church, we're gonna talk to God about this, we're gonna pray about this, and that's gonna solve all our situations, and we're gonna come back and it's gonna be all good. And I just want to talk about some of these fact versus fiction things, right? Or these taboos around mental health, especially for our Black and Brown communities that are in existence and have been around for a long time. What are your expertise about these facts versus fiction things, these taboos? What do you guys have to take on this?
I'll jump in. I'll take it just from like the religious standpoint, because I grew up in a religious household, and that it doesn't have to be either or, right? I mean, there's a lot of therapists who are faith-based therapists. And so that's an opportunity to integrate your faith, your religion, and also getting therapy and therapeutic support. So I think, yeah, it can be both, right? You can pray to the Lord above about, getting the supports and the resources that you need while also taking the steps. Oh man, there's a quote that my mom always says, and I can't remember it now, but it's like, Jesus is going to give you the tools, but sometimes you still got to take the steps, right? And like therapy is part of the steps. So from my perspective, so I think, I do agree. I think that is a taboo, but there's faith-based therapists. If people don't know that, it's out there.
I also think a lot of people in the community, in the Black community, worry about what's going to happen when you tell that stranger what's going on in the house. There's that like privacy. And I don't know, I can't even speak to where that has come from, like in our history as Black people in the United States. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that authorities have been people that we haven't been able to trust. And I think, we talk all the time as education professionals about having people in the spaces that look like our students, because we understand that there's a lot of history that we're trying to overcome. So I think I don't want to put this on families and students. I actually am going to put it on us. We have a responsibility to reach out to our families and build intentional relationships, not just when the thing has gone bad, not just when the mental health is in question, not just when the discipline has happened, right? But we start early and we say, hey, I'm here for you. What do y'all need? Like Mr. King spoke, right? Like, what's going on in here? What's up? How y'all feeling? How can we help you? Inviting them into the school building. We know when we look at our PTAs, when we look at our parent organizations, we're not seeing a lot of families that look like us. There's a reason for that. And maybe that's the structures we're putting in place, the things we are not considering. And it just is something as simple as humbling yourself to ask these families what they need and not just assuming that because you'll build it, they'll come, because that's not always the case.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Mike, because I was thinking just in terms of it is on us. And I think I had a previous conversation where I'm talking about the handoff. And the handoff to me is the way you kind of introduce a youngster to services. So I've seen it done the wrong way quite a few times. In other words, I've seen, hey, you need to talk to somebody, don't you? Yeah, you need to talk to somebody, you know, and then, or the overplay. Oh my God, you need to talk to somebody, you know, and then there's also, hey, that's my kid over there. You let me know if ever he acts out or if they do, you know, you let me know. You give me a call. Here's my number. I mean, there's just certain ways that that just doesn't work. And I guess to your point, Mr. Edwards, I think sometimes that starts some of these thoughts and ideas, or at least exacerbates them. So I think, you know, similar to the way you would hand your kids off to the next door neighbor to take them to soccer practice or whatever the case might be, or the way you would kind of hand over a baby, you know, to your auntie or somebody. I mean, it's just, the handoff is very important because the kids are much more observant than we think. So I think that's something we have to do better.
So I have a question for you all. As professionals, you know, in this building in District 65, and, you know, looking around and may not seeing yourself reflected in your colleagues or in those spaces, how do we do that, right? How do we build that community, right? When it's just one of us who's the school psychologist, or one of us who's a social worker, or how do we build that community and get students to feel comfortable with us? Because let's be honest, when we're talking about being reflective in these spaces, sometimes we don't even talk to each other, right? And sometimes we don't even build that community with each other as staff members or as adults in this space. So how do we first get that going, and then reach out to bring in our community, bring in our students? How do we do that?
I'm gonna just touch bases on that really quick. It starts with leadership. Dean King is leadership for me. I have an abundance amount of respect for Dean King because, like he says, it's that handoff. It was the handoff from him to me that made me full circle it back to ATHS, right? So it literally starts when you recognize that all students have potential, and how you moisturize that potential and let it grow. The handoff is part of that. So I think it just starts with recognizing, one, that our students all have the potential to grow, and then two, moisturizing the soil. And once you start doing that, then we can see some things change from there.
Okay, with that analogy, Ms. Clark, soil, all right.
I'd just like to add that, you know, we in this network, in this community, owe a lot to one another. So just like you called out Dean King, right? When he was Mr. King, the social worker, and I was a social work intern, right? I remember, you know, how I felt looked after by that community. I felt looked after by Dr. Campbell. I felt looked after by number of Black and Brown leaders in District 65, and even more so to this day. So I think we got to look after one another, right? Like, we got to bring each other into the field. When I was a MSW student, There was only 2 Black people in the whole program, and I was the only Black male in the whole program, and second male only, but that's a different story. But you know, people looked after us, and I think we got to get away from that idea of like, we all do it on our own and we're all so tough and pulling ourselves up by our bootstrap. Like, I need everybody in this group. I need Miss Cooper and Miss Clark and Miss Bolus and Miss Wilson. Like, I need you all. And I need to stay connected. And so I think we got to remember that, like how much we rely on one another.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think
If
like
I could add
sorry.
to that.
Go ahead.
No, you're good. I think I got a little bit of a lag. Okay, I think I'm back. I was just saying, to build off what you had said, Mike, around this idea of kind of working harder. I feel like we get into that trap sometimes as Black professionals and Black people more broadly, like when you are feeling like something is not right with either your mental health or even professionally, like, oh, I need to work harder. I need to figure this out. Like, I need to, like something, I'm just not putting forth enough effort. You know, when in reality, it's a matter of tapping into your networks, into your resources, and being willing to lean on someone else and ask for help when you need it. So I think that applies within the building. It's something I'm certainly still learning. This is my first year at ETHS, so I'm so happy to be in this community with you all. It certainly is very affirming for me to see other people here that look like me that I can go to. And for parents and students listening, like, when you're struggling with your mental health too, in that same way that, you know, I can reach out to other people on this call, you've got other people in your community that you can reach out to as well to help support you.
Yeah, I think all of that's important. And we have a beautiful problem here in Evanston. And our beautiful problem is that we have so many people who believe that they absolutely know what's best for students. So the students are like the diamonds, you know, and everyone's around the diamonds trying to shine, help them shine and you know, and reflect light, you know, onto them and from them. And that's a beautiful problem because you've got a lot of folks who want to help. But a problem in the sense that sometimes the more people involved, the more complicated things are. And so we go back to having that respect and that communication, because Coop and I might feel differently about a particular situation, but I know I respect her and her mama, and I need to take it a step back and recalibrate what I thought I was looking at. And that's just what it is. I mean, you know, and if everyone didn't believe that they knew what was best for students, then this would be a sad place, and nothing would happen in the right way. So it's a beautiful problem, you know, and I'm interested in continuing with the beautiful problem.
Yes, I like completely agree. And I think in terms of like building community, I look at it from my role within that. And my hope is that, just like Dean King said, like if there's something that I did that maybe didn't align with what another team member thought, or potentially what another team member thought a student needed, that I'm coming, or that people feel like they can come to me and say, hey, like, this didn't rub me right there. I didn't think it was that. So I think part of building a community is being a good community member, you know, like being somebody who kids can look up to, but peers also respect, and you're respectful of other peers. So I think if we start with ourselves, we're able to, you know, kind of back to Ms. Cooper's question, if we start with ourselves, we're able to model that. And you know, I am naturally kind of one of those people where when I'm like this, you know, like I have my task list, I'm gonna boom, 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 boom. So me trying to take a second to say hi, you know what I mean? Like make that space to build the community in between all the work that needs to get done, is kind of how I attempt to try to take personal ownership of what's needed.
I think that just says a lot about community, right? I think just being on this call and thinking about how we know each other, even with Miss Wilson being her first year, like the impact that she's made, like, come on, sis, you're gonna be in this call. But I think that's one of the things that, even being a product of this environment, now on the other side, seeing the importance of that, building the community and getting our students as they're, you know, if possible, coming through the door, building that communication or that community with District 65, you know, that whole, like we said, reaching back, oh, that's my kid, you know, we don't have to do it like that, but we know that this community in Evanston, as we all, you know or are learning, it's a small town. Everybody know everybody, everybody's connected, you know, everybody went to school with somebody. And it's just the fact of how that is beneficial, especially when we're talking about, you know, concerns of health, mental health and healing, right? I think one of the things that I saw everybody's face when we said that growing up in, you know, whatever religious organization we grew up in, but growing up in that church, you know, state, like, oh, we just gonna pray about this, or, oh, this is gonna be all right. And I looked and I was like, how often have we heard that? How often, in going back to those taboos, is it just gonna be okay, right? Or it's not that big of a deal, right? And I think in shifting the focus and going back to that fact versus fiction, as Ms. Clark had introduced, like, can we talk about that whole notion of Black people don't do therapy, or Black people don't, you know, we don't have mental health issues, or that's just our crazy uncle or whatever? Like, what is that about? And how can we continue to kind of, like, you know, break away from that, right? Because we know all the things that we've been through, right? Even we don't even have to go back years. Let's just talk about January 2020 to December 2020, okay? Like, let's talk about it and talk about everything that we have to go through. How can we stop, you know, feeding into that, oh, we gonna be okay if we just go to church and scream and cry on the floor and we gonna be fine, or if we just, you know, pray about it, or, you know, talk to the universe. Can we talk about that, please, a little bit?
Well, I just want to say that you know, and I know the vein in which you're presenting that, so I believe you'll agree. We just know historically that has been great for us, and spiritual connection is very important. But I think what we've come to know is, like what Manera says, that it doesn't have to be either or just one, or better or worse. You know, it's a collective, and I think that just needs to be considered. It's a collective. And we all have diamonds to polish, so to speak. That's all I want to say.
For me, when I hear your question, you know, this idea of Black people don't do therapy, I kind of answer that with, like, kind of flip the script. You know, we think that traditionally you think that, oh, you need to go to therapy because something's wrong with you. And a different way of thinking about that for Black people is like, you can go to therapy because maybe there's not necessarily something wrong with you, but there's something wrong with the world that we live in, for you being a Black person, right? Like, this world is not set up for us. And so you go to therapy, not because there's something wrong with you, but because of, like, there's a lot that's wrong with your environment and how people don't show up for you, how you are discounted, like, you know, all these different things.
Say that.
And
Say
therapy,
that.
I think of is, yes. And so it's not that, like, no one's there to pathologize you or tell you, you know, what your problem is or what you need to do. But a lot of, you know, how I view my role as a clinician is, you know, and the easiest way I can think of to explain therapy is it's kind of like talking to a friend in some ways, except that when you're talking with a friend, a lot of times, or even a parent, they might have a way of turning the conversation back on themselves. Like, oh, well, let me tell you about what I'm going through, or let me tell you about, you know, this other thing, or maybe you should try X, Y, and Z. Have you done that? Like, you know, and it doesn't always feel helpful. You're kind of like, I just want someone to listen to me and, like, not talk about themselves. That's what a therapist does. So, would highly recommend checking it out if you have not already. It's just that space to offload and not have any other types of expectations involved with that, or the expectation of, oh, I have to check on my friend now. Like I spent so much time talking and I'm worried because I didn't ask about them. Like you get rid of all that in the therapy environment. So that's what I'll say.
Can I also just throw out there, I mean, we're all talking from our own lived experience and the people that we've grown up with, but I don't want people, specifically non-Black people, to come out of this conversation and say, Black people do blank, or Black people don't do blank. So I'd also just, and I know that's not what Ms. Cooper is saying, but I don't want anyone to think that Black people are a monolith and they all go to church and they all reject mental health and they all do this and they all do that. You know, we got some Black people who only listen to Dave Matthews Band and have never heard Drake, right? Some Black people never grew up in the church and are all about it. We are 4 to 6 mental health professionals sitting right here, right? How many times have we heard Black people don't do therapy, then they don't provide therapy either, right? So I think we got a lot of things that are getting cleared up, you know, with social media. That's one of the benefits of the internet and social media is you're getting to see the broad range of Black experiences and Black beliefs and Black values. And so one thing that is universal of all Black people is that we want to live ourselves as a self-actualized person. We want to be exactly who we think we need to be and how we see ourselves. And so to me, that's one of the most traumatic things for a young person is not being allowed to be who you are. And so the first thing we can do to help all Black people understand what they need to support their mental health is to let them be themselves and help guide them in the direction they need to go. But yeah, that's it. I get off my soapbox for that one. I'm sorry, y'all.
No, that's exactly right. And this is kind of off, but kind of reminding me, just therapy also looks like there's different types of therapy. So just to say someone goes to therapy, and I notice that a lot with all of my students, regardless, they're like, oh, I'm doing therapy. And I'm like, well, what kind? And they don't really know. And so I think that's an important part too, when you're exploring to go see someone, you know, what type of modality do they do? There's CBT, where maybe you're just learning like specific strategies. There's humanistic or more talk therapy, where you are just talking. There's also grief counseling. So maybe, you know, especially in this past year of COVID, right? Maybe you're specifically going to deal with a loss that you had. To Amani's point, you know, it's difficult when you're grieving. You may have a great relationship with your mom, let's just say, right? But maybe your mom is grieving too. And so it's difficult for both people who are grieving to really fully support each other in a therapeutic sense, right? It may be in a familial sense, but not therapeutic. So there's also that opportunity. So I just want to say that as well, you know, to explore the different types of therapy that may work for you. And it could be maybe seeing someone for 6 sessions. It could be seeing someone for 6 years. There's also different lengths of time in order to do that. And if you aren't sure, at the very least, and if you're, you know, under the age of 18, go see, you know, your mental health provider at school. Start there and kind of get comfortable with what it's like to talk to somebody and explore that. And then, you know, if necessary, we can, reference you out to different resources in the community as well.
If I could add one more quick thing to that, a lot of times I'll hear sometimes from students, oh, like I tried therapy and it didn't work for me. And I know like a huge part of therapy is actually the relationship that you have with the clinician. And sometimes you just don't vibe with the person, you know, and like they could have the best of intentions to try and help you, but it's not what you need. And so I always remind students, like, if it doesn't work, maybe try someone else and interview your therapist before you set up that first session. There's like different interview questions you can Google online just to learn more about them and see if they're going to be a good fit for you. But don't be afraid to walk away from a therapist that isn't working for you, because ultimately, like, you are paying them to help you. So they won't be offended. You know, clinicians get that all the time. We totally understand it if you need to move on.
And also to know that at some point there's going to be homework in the process. You know, like the time after you leave the therapist's office is a really important time, just in terms of how you self-reflect, how you challenge yourself, how you expose yourself to different things. And it's not just going. Going is half the battle, getting there. But it's some work involved. It's some work involved. It certainly can be done.
All right, thank you guys so much. So as we get ready for tomorrow, we're definitely going to have some questions and some topics that are going to come up from our community members, students from 65 and 202. But I do want to say this, that it's not selfish to love yourself and to take care of yourself and to make yourself a priority. It is necessary. Okay, it is necessary. So with that being said, that just brings us full circle to talking about resources in our Evanston community for all our students. Can you guys, if you know anything or have any outlets or whatever, can we touch on that, of what the resources are in this Evanston community for our students and families?
So I'll start general. I mean, the biggest thing you can do, we have two beautiful public school districts and over 16 different buildings who support students in the Evanston community, or Skokie for a little slice. And so the first thing you can do is reach out to your people at the school building, right? Your school social workers, your school psychologists, your admin, your assistant principals and principals, because we often have a lot of information that we don't necessarily know who to give it to. But as soon as we recognize a family or a student needs something, we know exactly where to send them.
Yeah, this question is kind of hard just because, I mean, so much of what we do in terms of our referrals is based on, a unique need. And so I think Mike kind of hit the nail on the head. Reach out to someone first to just explain what you're talking about. I know at ETHS, we have 11 social workers. I think, did I count that right? So lots of mental health professionals here. We've got our psychologists. There's executive functioning resources. We have a whole academic support Google site and whole executive functioning Google site created by our school psychologist. And so there's a lot of assistance and support available to students if they need it. I think the key is you don't know what you don't know, right? For parents and for students, you don't even, maybe you're not aware of the resources because you thought oh, those aren't for me. I'd never need that, but definitely just get in touch with someone and we can get you connected.
And along that note, I know we did have a conversation right about concerns about, sharing your business. As mental health professionals, we do have confidentiality. So, if it's something that you don't want to be shared, or, we are pride ourselves and ethically bound by confidentiality as well. So that's something just for families to know. It's not something that just because you tell us, we're going to go tell the rest of the team at the school. It's something that can be kept between yourself and the mental health person. So I just want to caveat that it has to be a mental health provider. So your social worker or school psychologist that's bound by confidentiality. Other members of the team aren't, but we are.
So we just want to say thank you guys so much for coming on here and hitting a topic of mental health for tonight. I know that the students, families from 65 202, the community members got just a little taste of what we've been yearning for, is this conversation, right? Is to creating the platform of having an open dialogue about a topic that we don't really necessarily talk about. And tonight was the first night, and hopefully we have many more conversations moving forward. Tomorrow, for the community members and students out there, we will definitely have a Q&A session with these professionals at hand. So please tune in with us. Once again, we want to say thank you for tuning in to our series about Let's Talk Mental Health. This has been Ms. Clark and Ms. Cooper down there with Black 365. Have a great night. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.